There's a bit of an expectation when you first boot up Ocarina of Time. No one goes into it without first knowing its legacy, and that's what makes producing this podcast a little more intimidating. I want to have interesting and thoughtful impressions for you to listen to, but anything I noticed has probably been analyzed in more depth before. And any critiques I have better be backed up with some strong arguments, else I'll have some additional explaining to do. So, I've sat on this game for a month, and I'm just going to share with you the experiences that stick out in my mind the most. Whether they're actually novel or not, I don't know, but I hope you enjoy. I'm Alex, and here are my impressions. Atmosphere. I remember my first run-in with Ocarina's atmosphere well. It was when Link first awakens in his home in Kokiri Forest. The reason, and this is going to make me sound like I was playing in '98, was the 3D environment. I spent a good 10 minutes just bumping into things and viewing Link's room with the free roam camera. The music hit the spot perfectly too. When I finally stepped outside, I looked across Kokiri Forest and just took it in. There wasn't anything profound to look at in retrospect, just some NPCs to talk to and obstacles to teach you basic maneuvers, but I still felt the need to pause for a moment. I understood what this was, that this was the first 3D Zelda. I can only imagine the technical feat it was to create this world. It's like my mind traveled back to the late 90s and I saw the excitement of so many people immersed in the environment, and I could feel that sense of adventure. From there, things proceeded pretty normally. You get your sword, you go through the first dungeon, and you're off on your quest. Ocarina of Time continues to hit on exactly the right emotion each area should bring out. The sacredness of the Deku Tree, the rolling hills of Hyrule Field, the bustling market. With each emotion brought out, the world feels more alive. And when something feels alive, you begin to connect with it. I soon had another moment that made the biggest impression on me. It's the area where you meet Zelda for the first time after sneaking past Hyrule's castle guards. When I entered the area, I looked up and had a really immersive moment. You're in this quiet, enclosed area, but you see a castle tower rising above the wall in front of you. And on top of that tower, the wind is blowing a flag. I just stopped and stared at the scene for a moment. I was struck by the serenity of the place. It felt like for a brief moment I was there. I don't remember if there was any background music, maybe there wasn't even a wind sound effect, but I could hear the wind anyway in my mind. Usually my thoughts are flooded with gameplay design or artistic choices, but for that second I was in Hyrule's garden. And later I thought, wow, this is what Zelda is capable of. The soundtrack is a large part of what makes the atmosphere so effective, but Ocarina of Time goes a step further than the average game with a mechanic that connects the player with its music. With the in-game Ocarina, you play melodies straight from the game's soundtrack. It seems like a small thing at first, but by learning these melodies, you're building a relationship with the game world. Example: when I entered the Temple of Time to obtain the Master Sword, I couldn't help but feel like something was familiar. So I play the Song of Time and open the gate, and suddenly it clicks. The background music echoing throughout the temple is the Song of Time itself. I could recognize it now. That awareness made a permanent place for the tune in my head, and I can still play the notes perfectly without looking it up. I also had a similar experience with Saria's song. It's moments like these, especially anything involving great music, that make me understand why Ocarina of Time is so cherished amongst players. However, almost no game is without flaws. The dungeons were okay, and I really enjoyed the Fire Temple, but that's probably because I like Gorons. But I think everybody can agree that the combat could be improved. The controls are clunky. For whatever reason, I couldn't reliably use the lock-on. There were times when it just wouldn't respond, so I eventually just resorted to mashing the button until it worked. Maneuvering Link never felt fluid. You use the A button to roll, unless you're locked onto an enemy, in which case it's a forward lunge attack, even though B is already a dedicated sword button. And the camera can show awkward angles, which is why I really wish the lock-on worked well, and yeah. Fortunately, these games are not about combat, but it is still part of the experience and rarely ever felt good. All in all, Ocarina of Time is now the center of the series. While the original Legend of Zelda introduced us to the concept, and A Link to the Past gave us the personality and design, Ocarina of Time is what shot the series through the stratosphere. Its 3D design principles have influenced all successive games, and the story serves as the core to every lore discussion and timeline theory out there. Beyond that, through atmosphere and music, what it succeeded in doing the best was capturing the heart of its players. Ocarina of Time is nothing short of memorable. During my series playthrough, the Zelda games that I've enjoyed the most tend to be the ones that break the mold. I had a lot of fun with the side-scrolling RPG hybrid that is The Adventure of Link, and the new characters and setting of Link's Awakening got me invested into the story more than any Zelda game before. Majora's Mask is also unique to the series. It sticks out for having the darkest tone and subject matter yet. Death is on everybody's mind in the land of Termina. The entire game, you got this giant moon looming overhead that's predicted to crush everyone in 3 days. But beyond that crisis, Majora's Mask carries some sad plot elements. One reoccurring theme I saw throughout the story was the idea of carrying on the will of the dead. Collecting and using masks is one of the game's unique mechanics, and by wearing certain masks, you can transform into different races. These masks are the physical embodiments of someone who has passed away. I'll go over them quickly. The Deku mask is implied to embody the butler's son, who died in the caverns beneath Clock Tower. The Goron mask embodies Darmani, the Goron hero who died trying to stop the cold winds from freezing Snowhead. And the Zora mask embodies Mikau, the legendary guitarist who died trying to recover his people's stolen eggs. In the case of the Goron and Zora masks, it rests on Link to carry on their dying wills. Link also carries on the will of the undead iconic king to lift the curse off his territory, though he doesn't become a mask. When you first meet these lingering spirits, they are tormented or vengeful. You must play the Song of Healing in order to put their souls at peace. They then explain to you the ambition that led to their deaths, and impart on you a mask that captures their essence. By wearing these masks, Link, and by extension the player, is fulfilling their final will. This is really cool by itself, but when you couple it with the looming despair of the moon crushing Termina, it creates a message. The moon, unpleasant and unavoidable, is death itself. But by picking up the legacy of those behind you, you become part of a chain that transcends death itself. In the ending, after you fulfill everyone's wishes, you're able to stop the moon from falling and defeat Majora. Maybe real life isn't so kind, but there's a kernel of truth to every story. This is what I think is the core theme of Majora's Mask. One thing I really appreciated about this game was its world building. Majora's Mask features a record low 4 dungeons, but this by no means makes it the shortest Zelda game. What it lacks in dungeons, it makes up for in overworld. You spend considerable more time outside fulfilling quests and exploring towns. This has some huge benefits. You're interacting with more people, and each interaction increases your relationship with the game world. For example, I really got into rescuing Lulu's eggs. I like carrying on the will of Mikau, being a rock star, sneaking into the pirate's fortress. When I started, I couldn't put it down, and when I had to put it down, I was thinking about it later. I was experiencing cognitive flow. There was an urgency, and the game was giving me just enough challenge to keep me engaged. I think this is contributed by the lovable world building. And going off of that, let's talk about Clock Town. Clock Town is a first in the Zelda series in that it acts as a central hub. In previous games, you're on an adventure in every sense of the word. You don't rest until your journey is over, you're constantly bouncing around between dungeons, but in Majora's Mask, you have an area that you regularly return to. It's a home. And the people there are so vibrant. You can't walk 2 steps without some goofy character jogging past you. With Clock Town, I felt a sense of community. By spending the time developing this world and letting the player interact with it, you create an experience that people will only remember fondly. Now for my criticisms. I'm about to describe to you a Zelda game. In the beginning, there's a forest that you have to navigate perfectly, otherwise you'll wind up at the start. Later, you need to play a song to calm down a Goron. There's also a sequence where you must sneak past the Gerudo tribe. Oh, near the end, you'll explore a canyon-themed area where you'll find a mirror shield, and you get the idea. What game am I talking about? Majora's Mask or Ocarina of Time? And that's the thing, the games are very similar. Beyond the reused character models and music, there's also reused mini-games and gameplay progression, and this results in the whole title feeling very samey. I know that some would say, oh, Termina is an alternate dimension in the Hyrule, of course some things will be the same. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is because Majora's Mask needed to be developed in a year, so they had to reuse their assets. And there's a consequence to that. A lot of the game's content has quite literally been done before, one-to-one. Its dark tone and story is refreshing, like I talked about. But for me, because I could accurately predict what tool or puzzle I'd encounter next, the game lacked a lot of excitement. In my opinion, that's a fair criticism. Overall, I get it now, why Majora's Mask is held in such high regard in the Zelda community. I think the dark tone, yet lovable world building combine to create this depressing, endearing experience. It appeals to so many people because it's not one-sided. It is dark, and it is hopeful. For this reason, Majora's Mask manages to be a standout in the Zelda series. I'm Alex, and thanks for listening.